across the unlit gulf between stars, where ancient dust drifts like forgotten prayers, a single transmission flickered to the ethereal void. It carried neither designation nor cipher key, yet its cadence resembled the rhythm of long-sealed imperial archives, as though some buried database had awakened beneath layers of sanctioned silence. In its wake came an unsettling resonance, a tremor that reverberated through astropathic networks like a whisper carried across a cold cathedral floor. Those who sensed it described a faint impression of shifting stone, as if colossal statues within the imperial palace stirred beneath veiled torchlight, acknowledging an omen long denied. The origin of the transmission remained elusive, drifting to the layered debris of warp storms as though shielded by some forgotten aegis. Adepts who parsed its echoes noted patterns reminiscent of pre-heresy doctrinal registers, suggesting a voice carved from epochs older than the Imperium itself. Within the vaulted scriptoria of distant segmenta, quill scribes traced the anomaly against chronometric data, finding impossible alignments with vanished crusades and silent sectors where entire astropathic choirs had once gone dark. As these correspondences accumulated, the transmission grew heavier, as though the message strained to impose long-buried purpose upon a galaxy drowning in unending war. Some claimed the distortion carried the tonal imprint of a living mind, though aged by millennia and weathered by echoes of shattered timelines. Others insisted it was no voice at all, but an awakening memory, a fragment of the Imperium's earliest foundations stirring beneath layers of redacted history. In dim observatories overlooking dead moons, cryptomancers imagined vast archives entombed under mountains of ferrocrete and forgotten odes, rising like submerged leviathans toward consciousness. Each new interpretation deepened the unease, for whatever force shaped the signal seemed determined to breach the veil of sanctioned ignorance that safeguarded humanity from truths too dire to confront. Yet even as fear rippled across the highest echelons of the administratum, a strange clarity accompanied the disturbance. Scholars who examined its frequency described impressions of corridors illuminated by flickering lumen strips, their walls scratched with sigils older than the Emperor's ascension. Others reported visions of dust-laden lenses turning upon rusted gears, as if ancient auspex arrays within long mothballed listening stations strained to speak again. Though none dared suggest it aloud, many sensed of the transmission emerged from a point beyond mere geography, as though it belonged to some threshold where memory and prophecy entwined within the warp's shimmering haze. The Inquisition moved swiftly, dispatching agents clad in austere black to suppress inquiries before they flowered into revelation. Entire research cells vanished into quarantined data vaults, their records replaced with solemn notices bearing the seal of absolute silence. On remote worlds where the signal's echoes manifested most clearly, sky watchers reported fleeting silhouettes upon the horizon, monolithic forms that dissolved when approached, leaving only trembling air and the scent of burnt ozone. These omens, though interpreted through fear and superstition, aligned eerily with the chronicle fragments preserved within prescribed tomes that spoke of spectral sentinels guarding secrets older than the Imperium's dawn. Nevertheless, even the Inquisition could not extinguish curiosity entirely. Within hidden chambers beneath basalt cathedra, archivists pored over reproduced segments of the transmission, their minds drawn irresistibly toward the cadence of its cryptic pulse. Some swore they glimpsed images within the static, weathered armor plates marked with forgotten heraldry, shattered spires rising from ash-shrouded continents, towering figures lost in storms of gold and shadow. Though these perceptions varied wildly, one certainty grew among those who studied the fragments, that the signal did not beckon arbitrarily. It sought specific minds, as though testing humanity's readiness to face what had long been concealed. On the frontier edges of explored space, rogue traders encountered faint reverberations of the phenomenon while navigating turbulent warp routes. Their decks thrummed with pressure unlike the usual psychic tides, resonating through steel bulkheads as if answering an ancient summons. Some captains reported the sensation of vast machinery stirring beneath the warped surface, gears older than forgotten empires grinding slowly toward alignment. Though hardened by decades of perilous voyages, they felt an unfamiliar tension, as though some unseen presence judged their passage to the star-glittered dark. Their accounts added weight to a growing suspicion. The signal marked the beginning of something immense. Among the distant watch fortresses of the Adeptus Astartes, librarians perceived the anomaly as a faint tremor threading through the immaterium, similar to the distant roar of a waking titan. In meditative trances, they glimpse fractured visions of battlefields strewn with shattered armor, their dust mingling with the fading embers of once glorious banners. They sense pathways opening through time's obscure corridors, where forgotten decisions cast shadows across the present age. Though bound by discipline and caution, many felt an instinctive recognition, as if the transmission echoed the final words of warriors who had stood at the threshold of history's most terrible turning points. As these scattered testimonies converged, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Even the warp, ever turbulent and capricious, displayed a rare stillness, as though contemplating the emergence of a long-buried truth. In hidden monasteries carved into hollowed asteroids, monks of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica murmured uneasily, their psychic senses brushing against distant shapes drifting to the immaterium like colossal shadows beneath a moonlit sea. Something ancient stirred, not in rage or hunger, but in slow deliberation, as though weighing the consequences of revealing its presence to a civilization staggering beneath the weight of endless calamity. Gradually, across every corner of the Imperium, one thought grew impossible to dismiss. The transmission was not a threat, at least not in the immediate sense. Rather, it resembled the turning of a monumental key within some hidden lock, a mechanism set in motion by forces whose existence had long slipped beyond human remembrance. Its purpose remained veiled, yet its intent felt measured, deliberate, almost mournful. And as its final echoes dissipated into the depth of the void, a singular intuition pressed upon every mind touched by its resonance. The sense that the galaxy had been invited to remember what it had chosen to forget. The signal's resonance did not merely stir the surface of human perception. It penetrated deeper, brushing against the long-forgotten sinews of history buried beneath the Imperium's outward order. In the silent halls of the Archivum Obscura, astropathic scribes traced its echoes alongside records of expeditions lost in the Segmentum Obscurus centuries ago. Names emerged that had been stricken from official registries. Crusade commanders, forgotten planetary governors, and psychers whose devotion had once approached the threshold of divinity. Each entry seemed to hum with latent significance, as though the signal itself threaded these disparate lives into a tapestry whose pattern had been obscured by deliberate erasure. Illuminated manuscripts, once deemed heretical by zealous curators, trembled faintly in their bindings, as if sensing the revival of truths too powerful for casual remembrance. Among the first to perceive the implications were the librarians of the Crimson Host, stationed upon the shattered world of Valdaris. In meditative communion, they interpreted the signal not as a mere transmission, but as a memory, a chronicle inscribed across the warp itself. It spoke of civilizations erased before the Great Crusade, of Xeno's alliances unrecorded, and of loyalist Astartes' chapters whose deeds have been expunged to serve the grand narrative of imperial mythology. As their visions unfolded, they discerned patterns echoing across millennia, the rise and fall of forgotten dynasties, the quiet destruction of entire worlds to suppress inconvenient truths, and the silent marches of forces that had never been inscribed in the annals of history. Each revelation felt like a muted strike against the edifice of imperial certainty. The deeper the investigation, the more the lines between myth and reality blurred. Relics emerged from vaults long sealed, object of ambiguous provenance that hummed faintly with psychic energy. One such artifact, a bronze diadem etched with symbols not found in any sanctioned codex, emitted a pulse resonant with the original transmission. Examination revealed that the diadem bore a sigil corresponding to a long-extinct Primarch legion, one whose name had been deliberately stricken from imperial memory. Scholars dared only whisper its identity, for speak it aloud risked contamination by the subtle malignancy of the warp. Yet in hushed tones, a grim pattern began to emerge. The signal connected these scattered vestiges of hidden history into a coherent narrative, a network of forgotten events whose implications threatened the very framework upon which imperial authority rested. In the ruined halls of Galanter, a world shattered during the Horus Heresy, fragments of data recorded by exiled tech priests provided further illumination. They chronicled expeditions that had encountered entities not cataloged in any official bestiary. Creatures capable of traversing time as fluidly as space, whose presence had reshaped entire planetary systems before being obliterated by judiciously timed orbital bombardments. The surviving data hinted that these incursions had left indelible imprints upon the psyker population, seeding abilities that generations later would be deemed anomalies or signs of divine favor. Each recovered fragment underscored a disturbing conclusion. The Imperium, for all its meticulous record-keeping, had been blind to entire vectors of influence that silently shaped its destiny. The pattern extended beyond mere historical observation. Certain individuals, long secluded in secretive monastic orders, began exhibiting knowledge that mirrored the signal's content. Among them, a Sister of Silence on the observatory spire of Thaziri reported visions of armored figures walking beneath starless skies, their helmets inscribed with archaic glyphs unrecorded in any liturgical text. She described corridors lined with stasis chambers containing beings whose forms seemed to shimmer between phases of existence. When questioned, she could provide no source beyond the vivid impression she experienced during her psychic communion with the signal. Yet each account aligned uncannily with fragments from the ancient archives, lending credence to the notion that the transmission was a vector of lost cognition, a deliberate reintroduction of knowledge excised from the Imperium's sanctioned history. In parallel, remote inquisitorial cells noted that the transmission resonated most strongly near planets marked by anomalous geological formations, obsidian spires, hollow craters filled with iridescent crystal, and subterranean labyrinths that defy conventional mapping. Survey teams reported subtle disruptions in the astropathic field, as though memory itself had been warped into the physical terrain. Ruined sanctums once dedicated to now-forgotten saints yielded inscriptions that, when juxtaposed against fragments of the signal, revealed lost chapters of imperial dogma. These chapters spoke of secret alliances with entities never sanctioned by the High Lords, pacts forged to forestall apocalyptic threats that the chroniclers had deemed too dangerous for general knowledge. Each fragment reinforced the growing realization that the Imperium's outward stability depended upon a foundation of deliberate ignorance. The transmission also bore an unsettling temporal quality. Events described within its resonance did not adhere strictly to linear chronology. They folded upon themselves like layers of a palimpsest, with outcomes presaging causes in a manner that defied standard historiography. Adeptus Mechanica scholars noted that the signal structure resembled the logic of certain void-born cogitators, machines capable of processing causal sequences beyond human comprehension. Some posited that the transmission was not merely historical but predictive, a record of futures that might yet unfold if the proper keys were deciphered. Within this framework, even seemingly trivial actions could ripple across centuries, subtly altering the Imperium's trajectory without ever leaving conventional records. Among the most haunting revelations were those concerning lost legions and clandestine campaigns. Records suggested that entire Astartes contingents had operated in shadow, their deeds hidden not due to failure, but by deliberate excision from history. In certain vaults, illuminated murals depicted battles against foes whose forms seemed almost dreamlike, creatures partially insubstantial, shifting between dimensions as if only half-bound to reality. The muralists' identities were themselves obscured, their signatures replaced by cryptic symbols interpreted by some as warnings. These campaigns, obscured by the Imperium's insistence on uniform narrative, had shaped critical junctures in the galaxy's balance of power. The signal, like a distant bell tolling, reminded the observer that memory itself could serve as both weapon and guardian. And yet, as the depth of the transmission's revelations grew, so too did the sense of deliberate design. It did not scatter knowledge indiscriminately, but seemed to seek out those capable of discerning patterns amidst the chaos of centuries. Psychers, archivists, and adepts of specialized orders all reported simultaneous insights, as if the signal tested the limits of comprehension. Each insight, however fragmented, pointed toward an uncomfortable truth. The Imperium's official chronicles were but a surface layer, concealing a subterranean current of events and actors whose influence endured despite suppression. It became evident that the galaxy itself contained strata of reality previously inaccessible, layers that could only be interpreted through the careful study of forbidden knowledge and the courage to confront uncertainty. By the time these connections had begun to crystallize, whispers of the transmission had spread quietly across the Segmentum Tempestus and beyond. Though the High Lords remained outwardly oblivious, subtle realignments occurred in the shadowed halls of command. Orders were shifted, exploratory fleets redirected, and sanctioned heresies quietly excised from investigatory records, not to destroy the truth, but to ensure that its revelation proceeded under carefully managed conditions. Every act, however subtle, reflected the weight of the Imperium's awareness that a force far older than any human design had begun to stir. The signal, once perceived as an anomaly, now took shape as an instrument of destiny, drawing the galaxy toward encounters with history that had been deliberately obscured, and preparing minds for revelations whose magnitude exceeded even the most expansive archives. As the librarians of Aldaris closed their meditative sessions, the last impressions of the signal lingered in the ether like fading stars on the edge of perception. Each revelation gained clarity, yet remained incomplete, leaving open the question of what had originally transmitted it, and why it had chosen this precise moment to awaken from silence. The sense of discovery was tempered by an awareness that each fragment exposed only a portion of a grander pattern, a weave of intrigue and influence spanning millennia. And in that unresolved tension, the galaxy found itself poised on the brink of comprehension, sensing that knowledge long suppressed would soon rise to challenge the very assumptions upon which the Imperium had built its dominion. The signal's revelations, once parsed with the fragile lens of human perception, began to suggest questions that no archive, no astropath, nor any sanctioned text could fully resolve. Its cadence hinted at agendas older than the Imperium itself, at currents beneath history, where motives twisted and folded in ways that defied mortal comprehension. In the shadowed halls of secretive orders, whispers grew into speculative theory. Some claimed the transmission was a remnant of forgotten Primarch's mind, preserved through mechanisms lost to time and capable of guiding or manipulating the galaxy's future. Others spoke more cautiously, proposing that it was an echo of a war older than even the Emperor's vision, an influence seeded into the fabric of human memory itself. Whatever the origin, it became increasingly clear that this phenomenon was no mere anomaly. It was a force deliberate and precise, weaving influence across millennia. In the shattered corridors of Isstvan III, where ruins of the heresy still smoldered beneath acid rain, scholars compared fragments of the signal against surviving battle reports. They discerned inconsistencies, entire skirmishes absent from official records, orders delivered and executed by commanders whose names had been systematically removed from annals. Visual records, salvaged from data crystals scorched by orbital bombardments, revealed shadowy figures moving with uncanny coordination, their heraldry unrecognized yet disturbingly familiar to those who had studied ancient codices. Such figures appeared in multiple eras, on planets separated by thousands of light years, suggesting not merely time's distortion, but the deliberate insertion of agents capable of threading events across centuries. These observations hinted at a truth long suppressed. History, as recorded by the Imperium, was but a surface layer atop a far more complex and subtle orchestration. The implications extended to the warp itself. Psychers who communed with the signal reported strange phenomena, glimpses of shadowed corridors stretching through dimensions, echoes of conversations that had never occurred, and the sensation of a presence observing from just beyond perception. Warp echoes, the librarians surmised, were not merely residual psychic energy, but traces of intentional manipulation. The signal seemed to act as a beacon, mapping the latent potential of human consciousness and filtering it through hidden vectors of influence. Some theorized that this force had anticipated the rise and fall of entire sectors, nudging events toward outcomes that preserved a pattern beyond the comprehension of mortal minds. To perceive this was to glimpse the machinery of fate itself, a structure so vast and deliberate that the Imperium's rigid bureaucracy was rendered insignificant by comparison. Yet even as theory took shape, contradictions emerged. Certain events hinted at a duality of purpose, as though the force behind the transmission sought not merely to influence but to challenge, to expose hidden flaws in the Imperium's perception of itself. Lost worlds, wiped from history for reasons long obscured, contained traces of civilizations that had interacted with unknown entities, forms that might have been allies or instruments of cosmic trial. Some scholars began to entertain the horrifying notion that the Imperium's narrative had been curated not solely by men, but by entities with incomprehensible intelligence, guiding humanity through iterative trials that remained hidden beneath layers of sanctioned history. Each revelation unsettled the mind, for it suggested the galaxy had been subject to design on a scale that dwarfed even the grandest imperial stratagems. In the vaults of forbidden archives, fragments of pre-imperial codices suggested another layer of conspiracy. There existed hints of a legion erased not for betrayal, but for knowledge too dangerous to remain accessible. Their deeds, meticulously recorded in cryptic glyphs, included victories over enemies whose very forms challenged the definitions of life and reality. These records suggested that humanity's survival had often depended on interventions unacknowledged by history, interventions orchestrated by forces now silent or imprisoned within the immaterium. The signal seemed to resurrect these fragments deliberately, urging its recipients to consider what had been sacrificed to preserve the Imperium's outward stability. In doing so, it forced recognition that the boundaries of human understanding were narrower than the galaxy it sought to govern. Theories proliferated among those who could perceive the signal's deeper patterns. Some proposed that it was a test, an evaluation of humanity's readiness to confront truths long denied. Others suggested it was a map, a hidden lattice threading across time and space, revealing loci where knowledge, power, and destiny intersected. Observations of warp storm disruptions, coinciding with planets bearing anomalous architecture, hinted at intentional seeding of events that could realign history's trajectory. Shadowy figures glimpsed in visions, forms shifting between states of existence, seemed to act as guardians or arbiters, ensuring that only those capable of comprehension could follow the signal's path. Every new insight reinforced a single chilling idea. The galaxy was not merely observed, it was curated, tested, and perhaps refined according to imperatives hidden from mortal eyes. Yet within this clarity arose profound uncertainty. If such a force existed, what was its ultimate aim? Did it serve a purpose aligned with the Emperor's vision, or was it indifferent to human ambition, acting according to principles inscrutable to those bound by corporeal time? Some propose that the transmission's timing, awakening only centuries after the heresy, was deliberate, waiting until humanity had achieved a measure of cohesion and psychic resilience sufficient to interpret the fragments without succumbing to madness. Others argued that the signal's emergence was a warning, a prelude to intervention on a scale that could remake entire sectors. In all interpretations, one truth persisted. The Imperium's current understanding of its own history was incomplete, perhaps dangerously so, and those who engaged with these revelations risked glimpsing a horizon that few could endure without fear. Further complicating matters were glimpses of a hidden hierarchy of actors within the signal itself. Certain patterns suggested coordination between entities whose motives appeared at odds, yet whose actions converged across time. Speculation arose that pre-heresy legions, exiled orders, and even Xeno's collaborators have been drawn into a complex network of influence, each playing a role in outcomes only revealed across millennia. The signal, in this reading, functioned as a narrative loom, weaving threads of knowledge, action, and foresight into a design visible only to those who could discern its subtle logic. Within this, the line between ally and adversary became perilously thin, and the notion of simple loyalty was replaced by recognition of roles within a far larger, almost unimaginable pattern. As investigations deepened, the librarians of Valdaris began tracing the signal's influence across multiple planes of existence. Echoes of events not yet realized appeared alongside historical fragments, creating a sensation of continuum where past, present, and potential future intertwined. Each revelation carried both opportunity and peril, the chance to reclaim lost wisdom, and the risk of awakening forces that had long slumbered. Those who interpreted the signal began to understand that its ultimate purpose was not to deliver answers, but to provoke understanding, forcing its observers to confront the fragility of their assumptions and the limitations of imperial authority. By the time the first full cycle of observations was complete, the galaxy had become a tableau of questions and half-revealed truths. The signal, inscrutable and deliberate, had demonstrated its capacity to reshape comprehension itself, to cast shadows over accepted narratives and illuminate corridors of influence that had long been denied. Its echoes persisted in warp and flesh alike, testing perception, revealing contradiction, and hinting at design beyond mortal reckoning. The universe waited in suspended tension, aware that every insight gained might simultaneously bring revelation and danger, and that those who followed the signal's path would confront truths whose magnitude could either elevate or shatter understanding. And as the last residual vibrations faded from immediate perception, one certainty lingered. History, as had been recorded, was only the beginning of a far darker, far deeper story. As the signal's resonance settled into the farthest reaches of human cognition, the galaxy itself seemed to pause, suspended between comprehension and uncertainty. Worlds long silent whispered to those who could hear, and starlit voids shimmered with a faint residue of memories that belonged to no living being. Scholars and psychers alike began to confront the unanswerable. What entity or mechanism had orchestrated the transmission, and to what end? Even the most disciplined minds could perceive only fragments of intent, glimpses of corridors lined with stasis chambers, where figures of impossible antiquity slumbered under wards older than the Imperium itself. The visions offered no comfort, only the inexorable awareness that the universe held layers of truth inaccessible to those bound by sanctioned knowledge. The Imperium's custodians, ever vigilant yet increasingly uncertain, found themselves navigating a labyrinth of questions without paths. Each recovered fragment of lost history, every anomalous artifact, suggested design rather than randomness, a deliberate architecture of influence spanning millennia. Some theorized that the signal functioned as a probe, sent to measure humanity's capacity for comprehension, patience, and judgment. In the sanctums of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, meditative disciplines intensified as psychers sought to trace the transmission's echoes, and yet the more they probed, the more elusive the pattern became. It was as if the universe itself resisted complete understanding, yielding glimpses only to those prepared to confront the moral and existential weight of knowledge long withheld. Remote fortresses reported disturbances in the warp unlike any previously catalogued. Temporal fluctuations, subtle but perceptible, suggested that the signal's influence was not constrained by linear chronology. Certain observers noted the presence of forms whose outlines flickered between tangibility and spectral shimmer, moving in ways that implied knowledge of events yet to come or already forgotten. These presences, sometimes glimpsed in the periphery of psychic vision, carried an unmistakable air of sentience and deliberation, as though evaluating the responses of those who sought to interpret the signal. Their intent remained unknowable, yet their influence was undeniable, shaping perception, guiding inquiry, and ensuring that the revelation of truth unfolded in calibrated increments. The implications for imperial authority were profound. Entire legions and crusading fleets, long believed to operate solely under codified orders, may have acted under subtle manipulation by forces invisible to all but those capable of sensing the signal. The notion that destiny itself could be guided by unseen hands challenged the very foundation of loyalty, obedience, and purpose. Even the Emperor's vision, conceived to unify humanity and shield it from the predations of the warp, was called into question, not for its failure, but for its potential incompleteness. The signal suggested that events suppressed in the official chronicles were not anomalies, but deliberate interventions, carefully orchestrated by powers whose names had been erased from memory. Within this framework, the role of forgotten entities gained new significance. Lost legions, vanished chapters, and secretive orders long hidden from recorded history appeared not merely as casualties of bureaucratic erasure, but as actors within a larger design, relics imbued with psychic resonance, unearthed from long-sealed vaults, carried coded instructions, warnings, or perhaps guidance intended to ensure the galaxy's survival along an unseen trajectory. Each discovery compounded the tension. Knowledge became both illumination and burden, revealing that the Imperium's apparent stability had always rested atop fragile scaffolding of omission, secrecy, and deliberate oversight. The transmission's influence extended even to worlds yet unexplored. Rogue traders, venturing into warp-laden corridors, reported encounters with phenomena that aligned with the signal's predicted patterns. Ghostly echoes of battles never fought, artifacts appearing in impossible locations, and star systems whose orbital rhythms seemed orchestrated rather than natural. These anomalies, subtle yet pervasive, suggested that the signal's reach transcended human record-keeping and administrative vigilance. It existed as an autonomous vector of history and destiny, threading together actors, worlds, and events across space and time in a lattice whose full design remained tantalizingly beyond perception. Speculation among the most attuned psychers and archivists grew darker with each revelation. Could the signal itself be an instrument of judgment, a means by which the galaxy was assessed, its potential measured against an inscrutable standard? Were those who heeded its call to act as stewards, or were they being drawn into a greater experiment whose terms were unknowable? And if the signal was guiding humanity along a path, what lay at its terminus? The questions had no definitive answers, only intensifying shadows. Every fragment of lost history illuminated simultaneously with a warning. Understanding might demand a toll beyond mere comprehension, a confrontation with truths so vast that the fragile order of the Imperium could be imperiled by revelation alone. Even in the most secret of conclaves, consensus remained impossible. Some argued that the transmission heralded salvation, a guide toward previously inaccessible enlightenment that could restore knowledge lost to war, heresy, and deliberate suppression. Others feared that it was a lure, a trap woven from epics of intelligence designed to lead humanity into despair or subjugation. These debates, conducted in hushed chambers lined with crystalline monitors and illuminated manuscripts, reflected the broader uncertainty permeating every sector of human civilization. The universe itself had become a text to be interpreted, yet its grammar was alien, its syntax treacherous, and its purpose unknown. And yet, amid the unresolved tension, the signal's presence imparted a singular clarity. It demanded recognition that history, as recorded, was insufficient. Entire patterns of causality had been excised, obscured, or redirected to serve the narratives deemed safe by the custodians of imperial memory. The galaxy, in encountering the transmission, was faced with a choice: to confront the fragile scaffolding of its past and seek understanding, or continue in sanctioned ignorance, accepting stability at the cost of hidden truths. For those willing to engage, the signal offered access not merely to knowledge, but to the architecture of influence itself, the subtle interplay of destiny, time, and consciousness that had guided humanity's rise across the stars. The final echoes of the transmission lingered like faint stars fading beneath the horizon of perception. They left no final answer, no resolution to the mysteries they had illuminated, only the awareness that the galaxy had shifted irrevocably. Minds attuned to the signal perceived the possibility of paths uncharted, of alliances yet unrealized, and of knowledge buried beneath layers of deliberate omission. The presence of forces older than memory, shaping events beyond conventional reckoning, instilled both awe and dread. It became evident that the Imperium story was no longer solely its own, but a chapter within a far vaster design, one whose conclusion had yet to be written, and whose scope might stretch to the very edges of creation itself. And so the galaxy waited, suspended between revelation and uncertainty, as the hidden currents of destiny stirred beneath the surface of known history. Each recovered fragment, each psychic echo, each whispered memory of forgotten campaigns and silent legions, pointed toward questions that could not yet be answered. The signal had awakened something ancient, deliberate, and patient, and its intentions remained as inscrutable as the void itself. For those who had glimpsed its patterns, the journey had only just begun, and somewhere beyond the reach of even the most vigilant custodians, the cosmos itself held its breath, guarding the final truth in silence profound enough to swallow entire worlds. In that darkness, the Imperium's future trembled, and the galaxy remembered that the deepest secrets are never truly lost. They only wait, eternal, to reshape all that is to come.